Modi's quiet move that crushed China's economy. For years, the world believed China had an advantage India simply couldn't match. Factories, ports, cheap manufacturing, massive exports, global supply chains, and a massive industrial machine capable of producing almost anything. Whenever companies wanted to manufacture at scale, China was often the first country they considered. India was usually mentioned later, sometimes much later. But something changed, and it didn't happen with a military confrontation. There was no dramatic announcement, no declaration of economic war, no speech from New Delhi promising to defeat Beijing. Instead, India made a quieter move. It started building an alternative, factory by factory, supplier by supplier, industry by industry. And while everyone was watching the headlines, India was positioning itself to capture something China had spent decades building: global manufacturing. But here's the part that needs to be made clear. India has not crushed China's economy. China remains one of the world's largest economies and manufacturing powers. So the real story is more interesting than the headline. India is quietly challenging China's dominance in important parts of global supply chains. And one of the biggest examples is electronics, because when Apple began dramatically expanding iPhone production in India, the symbolism was impossible to ignore. For decades, China had been one of Apple's most important manufacturing bases. Now India was becoming a serious alternative. And this wasn't just about smartphones. It was about what smartphones represented: technology, factories, skilled workers, exports, investment, supply chains, and the future of manufacturing. So what exactly did Modi do? Why is India suddenly attracting companies that once depended heavily on China? And could India's strategy eventually reduce China's economic influence? The answer begins with one simple idea. Don't try to defeat the factory, build another factory. But here's what many people didn't see coming. India didn't need to convince the entire world to abandon China. It only needed companies to diversify. One company moves part of its production, then another, then another. Suddenly, China isn't the only option, and that changes the economics of the entire system. This is why India's strategy has been so important. The government introduced production-linked incentives across major industries. The objective was simple: reward companies for increasing production inside India, build domestic manufacturing, create jobs, increase exports, develop suppliers, and make India a bigger part of global supply chains. It wasn't instant. Factories take years. Workers need training. Suppliers need to develop. Ports need investment. Roads and railways need improvement. Power systems need reliability. But India kept pushing, and eventually the results began appearing. The quiet strategy started producing visible consequences. Look at electronics. India's electronics production has expanded dramatically over the past decade. The country's mobile phone manufacturing industry went from a relatively small base to becoming one of the largest manufacturing stories in the world. According to India's Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, mobile phone production rose from approximately 18,900 crore rupees in 2014-15 to approximately 5.45 lakh crore rupees in 2024-25. That's an extraordinary transformation. India wasn't simply importing phones, it was increasingly producing them, and exports followed. India's mobile phone exports reached approximately 2 lakh crore rupees in 2024-25, according to government figures. That matters because exports create something even more valuable than factories. They create integration. Indian factories become connected to global companies. Indian suppliers become connected to international supply chains. Indian workers gain manufacturing experience, and global companies begin to think about India differently, not just as a market, but as a production base. That is how a manufacturing ecosystem begins. Then Apple became the symbol. Apple's supply chain has historically been deeply connected to China. Millions of devices have been assembled there. Thousands of suppliers operate around that ecosystem. Entire industrial regions developed around electronics production. Replicating that elsewhere is extremely difficult, but India started doing it. Apple suppliers expanded production in India. Foxconn expanded its Indian operations. Tata Electronics became increasingly important in Apple's Indian manufacturing ecosystem. And suddenly, India wasn't simply talking about becoming a manufacturing hub. It was manufacturing some of the world's most valuable consumer electronics. The numbers tell the story. Apple has significantly increased iPhone production in India, with reports indicating that India assembled around $22 billion worth of iPhones in the fiscal year ending March 2026. That represented a dramatic increase from the previous year. Think about what that means. A product once associated overwhelmingly with Chinese manufacturing was increasingly being assembled in India. China wasn't disappearing, but India's share was rising, and in geopolitics, share matters. This is where Modi's strategy becomes more sophisticated. India didn't say, China must lose. Instead, it said, India must become capable. That's a completely different approach, because if India becomes competitive enough, companies will naturally diversify. They don't need to be ordered to leave China. They simply need another option. And companies love options. If production is concentrated in one country, a disruption can shut down supply. A geopolitical crisis can create tariffs. A pandemic can close factories. A shipping problem can delay deliveries. A military confrontation can destroy investor confidence. Companies learned these lessons the hard way, so diversification became insurance. And India positioned itself as one of the biggest alternatives. India didn't attack China's supply chain. It offered companies another door. And then came semiconductors. This is even more important. Modern economies depend on chips. Cars need them. Phones need them. Satellites need them. Medical equipment needs them. Artificial intelligence systems need them. Weapons systems need them. Without semiconductors, modern manufacturing stops. India recognized this, and the government launched a major semiconductor push. India approved semiconductor and display manufacturing projects worth tens of thousands of crores. The country is still far from becoming Taiwan. It is still far from matching China's massive electronics ecosystem. But that isn't the point. The point is that India has started building capabilities it previously lacked. That changes the long-term calculation. Because a country doesn't become strategically independent by buying everything from somewhere else. It becomes independent by learning how to make critical things itself. First, you import the technology. Then you learn it. Then you manufacture it. Then you improve it. That's how industrial power is built. And China understands this better than almost anyone. China spent decades building manufacturing capacity. It built ports, high-speed rail, industrial parks, supplier networks, specialized factories, export infrastructure, technical universities, and enormous production ecosystems. That's why simply saying India will replace China is unrealistic. India won't replace China overnight. It may not replace China completely, and it doesn't need to. India's goal is different. India wants a larger share of the next generation of manufacturing, electronics, pharmaceuticals, automobiles, renewable energy, defense equipment, semiconductors, telecommunications, and advanced engineering. The goal is not to destroy China's economy. The goal is to make sure India's economy is strong enough that China cannot dominate India's future. That's a much more realistic strategy. And there is another industry where India is quietly becoming more important: pharmaceuticals. India is already one of the world's largest suppliers of generic medicines. Its pharmaceutical companies supply markets across the United States, Europe, Africa, and Asia. That gives India a strategic position China cannot simply erase. Because pharmaceutical manufacturing isn't just about profit, it's about health security. A country that can manufacture essential medicines has strategic importance, and India has been expanding its pharmaceutical capabilities for years. So when global companies think about supply chain diversification, India has an advantage. It already possesses industrial experience. It already has skilled workers. It already has international pharmaceutical companies. It already has export relationships. And it already understands global regulatory requirements. The foundation was already there. Then there's India's automobile industry. India is one of the world's largest automobile markets. Major global companies manufacture vehicles inside India. Indian companies are expanding internationally, and electric vehicles are creating another opportunity. The automotive industry is no longer simply about engines. It's batteries, software, electronics, sensors, motors, semiconductors, charging infrastructure. That means the automotive transition is also an industrial race, and India wants to be part of it. The same production ecosystem that manufactures one type of technology can eventually support another. Factories become more sophisticated, workers become more skilled, suppliers become more capable, and innovation accelerates. That's how manufacturing compounds. One industry creates the foundation for the next. But perhaps India's biggest advantage is something China can't manufacture: its population. India has more than 1.4 billion people. That is both a massive workforce and a massive consumer market. And its working-age population gives India an enormous potential labor pool. Companies want access to workers, but they also want customers. India offers both. That's incredibly powerful. Imagine building a factory in a country where you can manufacture products for export while simultaneously having a domestic market of more than 1 billion people. That's a different business equation. And as India's incomes rise, that market becomes even more attractive. More homes,
more cars, more smartphones, more appliances, more financial services, more healthcare, more travel, more technology, more consumption. A factory doesn't just serve the world, it can serve India itself. This is why India's economic rise could have consequences for China, even without India directly targeting China. Every company that diversifies production creates another manufacturing node outside China. Every Indian supplier that joins a global supply chain reduces concentration. Every Indian factory creates local expertise. Every Indian export creates international credibility. And every successful foreign investment encourages another investor. That's how momentum works. One company becomes 5, 5 become 50, 50 become hundreds, and eventually an ecosystem forms. China spent decades building that ecosystem. India is trying to build its own, and the world is paying attention. There was another major factor. The United States itself wants supply chain diversification. American policymakers increasingly worry about dependence on China for strategic industries. Europe has similar concerns. Japan has similar concerns. South Korea has similar concerns. Companies want resilience, and India fits into that strategy. This creates a rare alignment. India wants manufacturing. Western companies want diversification. Investors want new markets, and governments want resilient supply chains. Everyone has a reason to cooperate. That's why India's rise is not happening in isolation. It's happening because multiple forces are pushing in the same direction. India is not begging companies to leave China. Companies are looking for alternatives, and India is building one. And here's where Modi's strategy becomes politically important. The government has repeatedly emphasized Atmanirbhar Bharat, or self-reliant India. But self-reliance doesn't mean India manufactures everything alone. That's impossible in a modern global economy. It means India wants enough domestic capability to avoid dangerous dependence. That is a very different concept. India can trade with America, trade with Europe, trade with Japan, trade with South Korea, trade with the Gulf, trade with China. But when a critical supply chain is disrupted, India wants the ability to keep moving. That is economic security, and economic security is increasingly becoming national security. A country that cannot produce critical goods is vulnerable. India is trying to reduce that vulnerability. The results are already visible in India's defense sector too. India's defense production reached a record 1.78 lakh crore in 2025-26. The figure was roughly 46,000 crore in 2014. That is almost 4 times the level of a decade earlier. India is also pushing defense exports toward 50,000 crore by 2029. Again, the transformation isn't complete. India still imports important military systems, but domestic production is expanding, and that is important because the same industrial capabilities that support civilian manufacturing can strengthen defense manufacturing. Electronics, metallurgy, engineering, software, sensors, machining, aerospace. These capabilities overlap. Economic strength and military strength are increasingly connected. Now comes the obstacle. India's strategy has faced criticism. Some critics argue that India's bureaucracy remains too complicated. Others point to infrastructure gaps. Some say Chinese manufacturing remains far more efficient. Others question whether India can move quickly enough. And those criticisms aren't completely wrong. India still has problems. Power reliability varies. Logistics can improve. Land acquisition can be difficult. Skilled manufacturing workers remain insufficient in some sectors. Regulations can be complicated, and China has a massive head start. But that's exactly why India's strategy is important, because India isn't trying to solve everything in 1 year. It's building gradually. The factory comes first, then suppliers, then skills, then technology, then exports, then higher value production. That's how industrial economies develop. The transformation is slow until suddenly everyone notices it. And China still has enormous advantages. China remains a manufacturing giant. It has deeper supply chains, more industrial clusters, more experienced suppliers, more established export infrastructure, and huge economies of scale. So anyone claiming India has already destroyed China is exaggerating. But that's not what makes India's story powerful. The important question isn't, has India defeated China? The important question is, has India become a serious alternative? And increasingly, the answer is yes. That's the real change. Think about what happens if this continues for another decade.
More factories, more electronics, more semiconductors, more automobiles, more pharmaceutical production, more defense exports, more renewable energy manufacturing, more global companies operating in India, more Indian companies expanding abroad, more skilled workers, more infrastructure, more suppliers. At some point, the world won't describe India as an alternative. It will simply describe India as one of the world's major manufacturing centers. That's the destination, and China knows what that means. Because manufacturing dominance isn't only about factories. It creates jobs, it creates exports, it creates political influence, it creates technological knowledge, it creates economic leverage, and it gives a country a seat at every major supply chain negotiation. This is why the quiet move matters. Modi didn't need to announce India is coming for China. He didn't need to. The factories are announcing it. The exports are announcing it. The investments are announcing it. The smartphones are announcing it. The semiconductor projects are announcing it. The pharmaceutical exports are announcing it. The defense production numbers are announcing it. Every new manufacturing facility tells the world the same thing.
India wants to build. And when a country of more than 1.4 billion people starts building at scale, the consequences are enormous. Every factory built in India is another choice for global companies. Every supplier trained in India is another piece of the ecosystem. Every export leaving an Indian port is another connection to the global economy. Every foreign company investing in India is another vote of confidence. Every Indian startup solving a manufacturing problem strengthens the ecosystem. Every engineer trained creates future capacity. Every new semiconductor facility creates knowledge. Every new defense factory reduces dependence. And every one of those changes makes India's economy harder to ignore. This isn't about destroying China. It's about ensuring that India has its own industrial destiny. That's the real masterstroke. And perhaps the biggest surprise is that India doesn't have to become exactly like China. India doesn't need China's political system. It doesn't need China's industrial model. It doesn't need to copy China's entire economy. India can build its own version, a huge democratic market, a technology-driven economy, a manufacturing powerhouse, a services giant, a pharmaceutical leader, a growing defense exporter, a global diplomatic player. That combination could become uniquely powerful. And if India gets it right, the global economy won't have two choices, China or America. It will have another major center, India. So let's return to the headline. Did Modi's quiet move crush China's economy? No, not yet. And saying otherwise would be misleading. China's economy remains enormous. Its manufacturing sector remains extraordinarily powerful. But did India quietly begin challenging China's dominance in global supply chains? Absolutely. And that may be far more important in the long run. Because economic power doesn't disappear overnight. It shifts gradually. A factory here, an investment there, a supplier moves, an export route changes, a new market opens, and after 10 years, the map looks different. That is how economic history works, not with one explosion, with thousands of small shifts. India's greatest weapon may not be a missile, it may not be a fighter jet, it may not even be a military alliance. It may be the ability to manufacture what the world needs: phones, medicines, cars, machines, software, satellites, defense equipment, energy technology, and eventually the most advanced components of modern industry. Because when the world needs something you can make, you have leverage. And when more than 1 billion people can produce and consume those products, you have scale. That's the combination India is building. Scale plus capability. So the real story isn't that Modi woke up one morning and destroyed China's economy. The real story is much more strategic. He recognized that India's strongest response to China's manufacturing dominance was not confrontation, it was competition.